I am Nancy Schick of Third Year Conflict Resolution. Third year is based on compassionate listening. If you look in the center of the English word heart, right, it's right in the center, EAR. Court sucks. I am a former litigator, and I do not know anyone who works in the court system, has to appear before someone in court, enjoys that experience. I think there's a lot more that we can do to keep people out of court and resolve their conflicts more effectively. If you take a look at your classic situation in a courtroom, it's people arguing. Does that really look like dispute resolution? It looks a lot like creating more disputes to me. I am more about this kind of scenario where we sit and we talk to each other and we are solutions focused and not so focused on what happened in the past and who's to blame, which is what we do in courts. That doesn't really leave us with a lot of room for moving forward. What do you do with that information? You found someone to blame. Yes, sometimes there needs to be amends made, and those cases maybe do need to be in court, but the majority of them, we estimate about 80% of all cases end up settling before trial. That tells me 80% of cases filed in court don't belong there. That is, again, why I work with mediation and informal resolution. Here are some of the services that I provide. I do informal resolution primarily of workplace disputes. I do work sometimes with small business owners as well. I've helped them dissolve businesses in ways that they can still stand to maybe be in a room like this together or in a physical room together. But I primarily work with things like worker misclassification penalties, workplace discrimination complaints, and employee for performance disputes. It's all of the different things that make work difficult for us. I think the number one complaint I hear from people who have employees is that's the hardest part of their job. That's a challenge for a lot of people. A lot of times what we discover when we sit down with employees who aren't performing well is there's a disconnect in their ability to perform the job. Maybe the employer hired them because they liked them and they thought that would work out. We hire friends or people that we think will be loyal to us, but they don't necessarily have the skills. We talk about all of these things coming together and then forming a plan so that everyone has an opportunity to win. I have used these techniques to terminate employees and have them leave feeling pretty good about their experience at the employer that they just left. Likewise, the employer feels pretty good about what they did together, and they can still do things like refer business back and forth to each other after they move on to different companies. I see that repeatedly because we're willing to just admit what's so and not make people demons because they're not performing well. Then what I do after I resolve those initial disputes is I give them that ongoing support. I work a lot with lawyers, accountants, social workers, funeral directors. We have a different way of operating because of our ethical rules and the responsibilities that we have to keep our license intact. There's also some psychographic combinations there that align very well with my practice. They're typically people who are serving in capacities where the emotions get very high. There's a lot at stake, and there's often trauma being brought into the dispute. I bring that conversation to light, and I give ongoing support for the professionals that are going through that. It's not at all unusual for someone to call me because they know they need to talk to an employee. But as one client frequently calls is, if I do this without your help, I'm not going to say it nicely. So help me say it nicely. It's not because she's not a wonderful person. She gets stressed and she recognizes now that when she's stressed, when her stress level is up here, she is not going to respond as productively as she would like. I bring her down to here so she can have a nice conversation with employees, and it has transformed her workforce. She has less turnover at this point, and she's starting to make better hiring decisions. So those worker misclassification penalties, if you're not familiar, but you need to know that you are classifying your workers properly. If you have called someone an independent contractor that is actually an employee, you can have huge penalties. The highest one I've ever seen is $500,000. My client was effectively a marketing strategist who was then outsourcing various pieces of the website development, the social media campaigns, and some of the graphics. And he was using independent contractors. The government said, whoa, wait a minute, prove that they're independent contractors. Fortunately, because of good documentation, we were able to prove that they were true independent contractors. I get a really good overview of how people are structuring their workforce, and then we start looking for any of those additional issues that can be not having workers' compensation insurance. In New York, it's also disability and paid family leave, safe and sick leave pay that's not being provided if you've misclassified someone. And of course, you've got all the payroll taxes and everything else. And those kinds of penalties can add up very quickly. That $500,000 penalty I was talking about, that was just for not having workers' compensation insurance. The other thing that I work with a lot are workplace discrimination complaints. There is no hierarchy of protected classes, and something that we're seeing happen in workplaces a lot more these days is that various protected classes are coming into conflict with each other, and employers aren't always clear on how to resolve those kinds of complaints. So sometimes they prioritize one protected class over another. Maybe they say, oh, since Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement, we need to prioritize people of color and women, but forget about people with disabilities, veterans, or people in certain religions. I've been helping employers sort those out. And again, I feel like those belong in an informal resolution scenario more than they belong in court, because if you go to court, the only real remedies you can give are things like injunctions, monetary damages, etc. And what most employees are looking for is fairness and a balancing of inequities in the workplace. We also work with employee performance disputes, documentation, self-examination, facilitated dialogue, all of those kinds of things that just bring that humanistic approach back into the workplace, which can be quite challenging in today's world with all the technology. Employees are pushing back. They're not concerned about things like what's happening with the gross domestic product. They're thinking, what am I getting out of my workplace? You're doing the same as an employer. And I can help you balance those things so that you don't end up in court. This is one of the things I like to remind people: speak softly. We're hard of hearing as human beings. We're listening for those hurts that we can heal, and we're healing the ones that we can't. I've been doing this since 2003. I love my work, so I am planning my next 20 years.